The scratching wouldn't stop, not even during the priest's final words. A hush fell over the mourners as the German shepherd, black and tan, its fur matted with days of neglect, clawed madly at the polished mahogany casket. Scratch! The noise was sharp, desperate, almost panicked. The widow gasped. The funeral director rushed forward, whispering apologies. Someone grabbed at the leash, but the dog, Max, wouldn't let go. He wasn't barking. He wasn't growling. He was warning. And then he did something no one could explain. He lunged backward, then slammed his front paws against the casket lid. Boom, a dull echo, hollow, almost too hollow. An elderly war buddy stepped forward, confused. "The hell's gotten into him?" he mumbled. Max whimpered and sat, trembling, his paw still resting on the lid. The pastor cleared his throat. "Shall we proceed to the burial?" "Wait." A new voice, sharp, commanding. From the back of the crowd, a uniformed officer pushed his way forward. Detective Ray Holston, homicide, off-duty, still wore the badge around his neck, tucked beneath his funeral jacket. His eyes locked onto the casket like a sniper to a target. "That dog's canteen certified," he said, stepping up. "I know that behavior. He's signaling something's wrong." The funeral director stiffened. "Sir, this is highly—" "Open it," gasps broke out. "You can't. He's already been embalmed. The viewing was 2 days ago. Holston didn't blink. "Open it now." There was a pause, tension strung so tight it could have sliced air. The widow Lana McBride stood paralyzed, eyes flicking between the casket and the dog that had once belonged to her husband. "I think," she whispered, voice trembling, "we should listen to him." Max let out a soft, painful growl as 2 workers hesitantly stepped forward with the tools. It took minutes, but it felt like hours. Then the seal broke, the casket creaked, everyone leaned in, and then a scream from the embalmer. He stumbled backward, hand over mouth, his face went sheet white. "Where's the body?" The coffin was empty. Not just empty, clean, no residue, no lining disturbed, no trace of a corpse ever having been there. "Detective." Halston stepped back like he'd been slapped. "What the hell is this?" The widow fainted. Max began pacing in circles, ears flat, eyes darting like he expected something or someone to attack. And just as paramedics rushed in, a phone began to ring, inside the casket. Inside. Halston lunged, dug beneath the false lining Max had scratched. A loose burner phone, still warm, 1 missed call, unknown caller, timestamp 2 minutes ago, and a single message on the screen. "This isn't over. You buried the wrong man." Detective Ray Holston didn't believe in ghosts, but standing at the edge of a desecrated grave, staring down into the hollow where a decorated soldier's body should have been, he felt the breath of something cold crawling up his spine. Max, the German shepherd, sat beside the casket like a sentinel, unmoving, loyal, haunted. And Ray was unraveling, not because of the message in the coffin, not because the body was gone, but because the man they thought they buried, Staff Sergeant Caleb McBride, was Ray's closest friend. And now, he wasn't just missing. He might never have been dead. 6 weeks earlier, Ray had stood in the hospital room clutching a folded flag against his chest. Lana McBride had been inconsolable, sobbing into Max's fur. The dog hadn't eaten for days after Caleb passed. He lay curled beneath Caleb's empty hospital bed, as if waiting for something, some unseen cue that never came. Ray had signed the death paperwork himself. He'd been there. Caleb had flatlined after his 3rd stroke. Blood pressure gone. No. Pulse gone. They said he never regained consciousness, never said a word, but in Ray's gut, something had never felt right. He remembered the last time Caleb had spoken, days before the stroke. His voice was weak, the words slurred, but Ray remembered every syllable like it had been carved into stone. "Ray, if something happens to me, don't trust the coffin." It had sounded like a delusion, pain meds, trauma. Now it sounded like a warning. Ray had dismissed it then, told himself it was just a dying man's fear, scrambled by regret and war memories. But now, the words echoed in his mind like a curse. Don't trust the coffin. And the dog. The damn dog had known. Max hadn't just been Caleb's canine partner. Overseas, He'd been trained in deep scent detection, electronics, explosives, even cadaver location. They said he could detect cortisol spikes, fear itself, and he'd scratched the coffin before the lid even closed. Ray watched Max now, curled, at the foot of the detective's couch, refusing to eat, refusing to rest. Eyes fixed on the front door as if expecting Caleb to walk in at any moment, and maybe he would. But what haunted Ray most wasn't just the mystery of the empty coffin. It was what Caleb had said a month before the stroke, in a rare lucid moment when they sat alone in the VA hospital. "Ray, I saw something over there, not war, not combat. Something buried, something wrong. If I die, they'll come for me. But I have something hidden. Max knows where. Only him." Ray had dismissed it as trauma-induced paranoia. But what if it wasn't? What if Caleb had faked his death, or worse, been taken because of what he knew? What if Max had been trying to lead them all along? Ray ran his fingers along the burner phone recovered from the coffin. Forensics hadn't cracked it yet. The word text message had been wiped remotely seconds after they opened the lid. "This isn't over. You buried the wrong man." There was no blood in that coffin, no fingerprints, no residue, nothing. It wasn't just empty. It had been prepared. And Ray couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't just a case. It was a trap. One Caleb might have set himself, or one he'd been lured into. Max suddenly growled. "Low." Warning. Ray snapped out of thought, his hand instinctively reaching for his holstered weapon. Someone was outside the window. A shadow. Watching. Gone in an instant. Ray raced to the door, nothing but the faint shimmer of taillights disappearing down the street, but at his feet. Max stood over something, a torn envelope, no postage, no markings. Inside, a single photo. Caleb, alive, eyes blackened, bound too. A chair, and scrawled on the back in shaky handwriting, "Follow the dog. He remembers everything." Ray didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with the photo of Caleb spread out in front of him, lit by the soft hum of a single desk lamp. Caleb's bruised face stared up at him from the glossy paper, his eyes swollen but still burning with a defiance Ray knew all too well. He turned the photo again. That message. Follow the dog. He remembers everything. Max sat beside the table, alert, as if waiting for Ray to finally figure out what he already knew. Ray leaned back, staring into the dark hallway. Caleb's voice echoed in his mind again. Max knows where, only him. The idea seemed insane, but this whole situation was insane. A faked death, an empty coffin, a funeral message sent from inside a sealed casket. Ray grabbed his keys, holstered his gun, and looked down at the dog. "You remember, don't you?" he whispered. Max stood, tail stiff, eyes locked on the door. He was waiting. They drove for hours. Ray let Max lead, following the dog's behavior through a mix of instinct and training. Every time Max whined, turned, or perked his ears, Ray adjusted. The route. It was irrational, borderline delusional, but he trusted him more than any lead. By sunrise, they were deep in rural Tennessee. No GPS, no cell service. Max jumped to his feet in the back seat, paws against the glass. He barked once, low, urgent. Ray pulled onto an old gravel road barely visible through overgrowth. It was private land, abandoned. At the end of the path stood a crumbling barn, the kind you'd expect to find corpses in horror movies. Max jumped from the car before it stopped rolling. He bolted toward the barn. Inside, the air reeked of mildew, rust, and something metallic beneath the surface. Max sniffed furiously, circling a pile of collapsed lumber, then stopping at a rusted trapdoor half buried under hay and chain links. Ray pried it open with his crowbar, heart slamming against his ribs. A ladder descended into darkness. Max waited, at the edge, looking back at Ray. Ray took a breath and descended. The first thing he noticed was the flickering of dim, battery-operated lanterns lining the tunnel. Someone had been here recently. The walls were concrete, cold. This wasn't a bunker, it was a cellar, man-made, hidden for a reason. Max pawed at a wall near the back. Ray pushed against it. It clicked. The wall shifted inward, revealing a smaller room. Inside, boxes, Labeled in black marker. Operation Mercy, do not open files, military grade. Ray's breath caught. He'd heard of Operation Mercy, a failed military intelligence mission scrubbed from public record. Caleb had been one of only 2 surviving agents, and now the evidence was here, but that wasn't all. On the far wall, Ray found something that chilled him more than the empty casket, a mirror taped around it. Photos. Dozens of them. Himself, Caleb, Max, Lana, Caleb's old unit. Some circled in red, some slashed out, and one photo pinned in the center, Ray's face, a red X across it. Max growled, ears up, footsteps above them. Ray clicked his flashlight off and drew his weapon. A voice echoed from the hatch above. "I told you this wasn't over, Detective." Ray stayed quiet, frozen in the shadows. But you never could leave things alone, could you? There was a click, the sound of fuel dripping. Max's ears flattened. "Go ahead. Take your files. Take your damn dog. Let's see how fast you run when the place lights up." A hiss, then flame. The tunnel began to glow orange. Max barked. Ray grabbed the box labeled Cal, eyes only, tucked it under his arm, and grabbed Max's harness. They ran. Smoke clawed at their lungs. The tunnel warped with heat. Ceiling fragments fell behind them like molten hail. They burst from the cellar just as flames engulfed the barn in a violent roar. Ray and Max dove behind the car. The explosion blew the side mirrors off and knocked them into the dirt. Ray lay there, coughing, clutching Max's fur like a lifeline. In his other hand, the scorched box. Max looked up at him, tail thumping weakly. "You just saved us both," Ray gasped. "Again." They checked into a roadside motel, low-key, off the grid. Ray pored over the files, scanning hundreds of documents, confessions, transcripts, redacted orders. Most of it made no sense. But one paper stood out. A letter addressed to Caleb. "You weren't supposed to survive. Operation Mercy was meant to fail. You and your dog that were never meant to come back." A list followed. Of soldiers, scientists, names crossed off. At the bottom, one name untouched. Lana McBride. Ray's blood turned to ice. Was Caleb's wife involved? But how? She'd been grieving, shattered. Nothing about her suggested guilt. But then again, the body was gone. And the last person to see Caleb before his supposed death? Lana. The next morning, Ray returned to the house where Lana lived, Max leading the way like a detective with a nose for betrayal. But something was off. The windows were open, curtains flapping, back door ajar, no signs of struggle. Ray moved through. The house with weapon drawn, kitchen empty, living room empty, then bedroom on the bed, Lana's phone, still unlocked. And a letter. "I'm sorry, Ray, I had no choice." Max whined at the closet. Ray opened it. Empty, except for a single audio recorder on the floor. He clicked play. "They came for me the night Caleb died. Told me he saw something. He shouldn't have. I begged them not to hurt him. They said he could live if I helped fake the death. If I told everyone the stroke was real, I thought it would protect him, but I was wrong." Her voice cracked. "He left something behind, something only Max could find. They knew it. That's why they tried to kill the dog first. You have to go back, Ray. Go back to where it all started." Max suddenly turned, barked. Once Ray looked out the window. A black SUV was pulling up to the curb, same model as the one outside the barn. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. One new text. "We warned you." For the first time in days, it felt like Ray had finally outrun it. He'd driven for hours, switching highways, avoiding main roads. The black SUV never reappeared in his rear view. The sun was dipping beyond the tree line when he finally stopped at a worn-out lakeside cabin he once used on undercover assignments. Remote, hidden, safe. He stepped out, gun still holstered, Max at his side. The silence was almost peaceful. Almost. Inside, the air was stale but familiar. Dust covered the floor. A few cracked frames still hung on the walls. Ray placed the box of files on the table, the recorder next to it, and sank into the wooden chair. Max curled up by the fireplace, exhausted, but alert. Ray opened a can of beans, ate in silence, and stared at the only thing that mattered now. The letter Lana had left behind. You have to go back to where it all started. He pulled the recorder closer, replayed the last few seconds of her message. They're everywhere. The funeral, the unit, even the department. You were never supposed to know. Please, don't let them find Max. Don't let them erase him like they erased Caleb. Ray felt the burn in his chest tighten. He looked over at Max. You're the last piece, aren't you? He whispered. That's why they want you gone. Max blinked slowly, resting his head on his paws. For a brief moment, Ray allowed himself to believe they had time, that the files were safe, that Lana was still alive, that maybe, just maybe, Caleb was too. He locked the front door, reinforced the back with a chair under the knob, and placed the files in the floor vent beneath the kitchen sink. Finally, he let his eyes close. The scratching woke him. At first, it sounded like wind, then declaws. Max was growling, low and steady. Ray sat up. Cold sweat clung to his neck. The fire was out. The sound came again, scraping, on wood from the floor. Ray knelt, pulled open the vent, and froze. The files were gone. Max stood rigid, facing the back wall. That's when Ray saw it. A faint red light blinking from behind the wood. Panels. A camera. Someone had been watching. The cabin wasn't a safe house anymore. It was bait. Ray reached for his gun. Too late. The windows shattered. Flashbang. White light. Ringing ears. A crash of boots, Max barked, lunging into the blur. Ray tried to rise, blinded. Voices, shouts, and then silence. When the smoke cleared, Ray was alone. The cabin destroyed, the files gone, and Max was gone too. Ray stumbled through the ruins of the cabin, ears still ringing, chest heaving. The air smelled like splintered wood, burned fabric, and something else. Tranquilizer. They hadn't come to kill. They'd come to erase. His head pounded as he leaned against the broken frame of the doorway, staring into the woods where the SUV tracks disappeared. They had Max. They had everything. The one thing Caleb trusted. The one thing Ray had left. Gone. He collapsed onto the porch steps, the weight of failure pressing against his shoulders like concrete. He pressed a trembling hand to his face, barely recognizing the man he'd become. Caleb had warned him, Lana had begged him to stop, and now they had all won. Ray had nothing left but a burned-down hideout, a blank phone, and a heart full of guilt. His voice cracked in the silence. I'm sorry, buddy. I let them take you. Max had been more than a partner. He was a survivor, a keeper of secrets, a silent shield between Ray and the worst parts of himself. And now, he was in the hands of the same people who faked Caleb's death, the same people who'd been watching them all along. Ray slammed his fist against the porch floor. The wooden board beneath him shifted. He paused, shifted his weight again. It wasn't just loose, it was hollow. He pried it open with his pocket knife inside, something wrapped in oilcloth, a smaller file, untouched, hidden deep. He unfolded it with shaking fingers. One photo. Max. In a military facility. Not a current picture, a surveillance image. Dated 2 months ago, before the funeral. Next to it, a list of names. One stood out. Facility. Argonne Labs, Oak Ridge Sector 9, a private defense lab. Shut down officially a decade ago, blacklisted. But Ray remembered it from his counter-intel days. It was still operating, secretly, and Max had been there, was still there. Ray stared at the photo until his hands steadied. They had taken everything. But they hadn't silenced the truth. Not yet. And as long as Max was alive, so was the mission. He stood, dusted off the ash and blood, loaded. His last clip, eyes locked on the tree line. You're not done yet, partner, he muttered. Then he stepped off the porch and disappeared into the night, toward the place they thought no one would ever come back from. The compound wasn't on any map. Ray reached the perimeter just before dawn, crouched in the tall grass, as mist snaked across the field. Argonne Labs had once been a military testing ground. Now it was something worse, a ghost site with an active heartbeat. He saw it in the faint hum of infrared motion sensors, the rhythmic pulse of underground generators, and the occasional flicker of a guard's silhouette on the upper catwalk. No insignias, no government logos, just black gear, silenced rifles, and blank stares. He counted 12. But they weren't the threat. The threat was what they were protecting. Max was in there, and Ray would burn it all down to bring him back. He slipped through a drainage shaft beneath the west wing, emerging into a tunnel choked with mildew and wire. Every step deeper into the belly of the facility felt like a step back into his past. Covert missions, government lies, and the classified operations he once carried out without question. This wasn't just about Max anymore, or Caleb. This was about something they buried and had killed to protect. He followed the heat sensors. The lab was still active, barely, but what chilled him wasn't the machines. It was the sound, faint, inconsistent, a low, muffled whimper. Max, Ray's heart kicked into gear. He broke into a sprint, passing empty containment rooms, broken restraints, and rooms where silence screamed louder than violence. He turned a final corner and froze. There he was, Max, caged, unmoving, breathing, barely, needles in his side, monitors, blinking red, a heart rate, sluggish. Max didn't bark, didn't react. His tail gave a single, slow thump against the cage floor. Recognition. Ray lunged for the keypad, wrong code. He slammed his fist against the panel. Nothing. Footsteps behind him. 2 guards. He dropped both with quick, brutal precision. Their keycards worked. The cage slid. Open. Ray rushed to Max, dropping to his knees. He was lighter, too light, covered in bruises. His eyes had lost their sharpness. But he was alive, and then something metal slipped from under Max's collar. Ray picked it up. A flash drive. Hidden. Undetected. Max had carried it in. Or Caleb had. He plugged it into the nearby terminal. Files. Opened. Password protected. Until he found the override. CALEB. A command string launched. Operation Phoenix failure. Subject K014 terminated. Subject K015 escaped. Current status. Compromised. DNA mod sequence detected in Unit Max 015 status. Cognitive retention exceeds expectations. Note, termination blocked. By handler imprint. Recommend. Eliminate handler. Ray Monroe immediately. Ray's breath caught. Max wasn't just a K9. He was part of something else. Cognitive retention. Imprint resistance. Phoenix program. They'd been building something. Superior war dogs? Bio-enhanced intelligence? No. Not just that. Ray opened the final folder. Surveillance footage. He clicked through. One clip. A lab room. Caleb, alive. Pale, restrained, hooked to IVs. Then Max, barking, thrashing, dragging guards backward. Caleb whispering something. Max biting through a steel lock. Then the explosion. Smoke. Scream. And... The screen cut out. But Ray now understood. Caleb had set Max free. Max had carried the last encrypted drive, and Lana must have known. That's why she warned Ray, why she left Max to him, because Max wasn't a pet or a tool. He was the evidence, living, breathing proof that the Phoenix Project existed and that it had worked. Sirens blared, security breached. Ray shoved the drive into his coat, hoisted Max into his arms, and turned for the exit. Gunfire erupted. He weaved through the halls, every step heavier with Max's weight, back through the tunnel. Smoke grenades behind him. One bullet grazed his leg, another ricocheted off a pipe. Then, light. Freedom. He crashed through the sewer grate, just as the backup. Team arrived. DEA, FBI. Caleb's old contact. The message Lana left had been forwarded before she died. Ray collapsed behind the SUVs, cradling Max, blood soaking into the gravel. "Call a vet," he roared. "Now!" But Max's eyes were open, just barely, and they were locked on Ray. He held on until the helicopter lifted, until the gunfire stopped, until Ray whispered the only thing that mattered. "You held the truth. You are the truth." Max's paw touched his hand, weak, but there. A silent answer. They hadn't broken him, not even close. 2 weeks later, a quiet cemetery on the edge of the city, Fresh grass, new headstones, sunlight trickling through tall oaks. Ray stood alone, suit wrinkled, hands in his pockets, watching as the workers lowered the polished casket into the ground. Caleb Munro, at last, given a name, a resting place. The funeral was quiet, no press, no ceremony, just Ray and Max sitting at his feet. The K9 had survived, barely, but the brightness in his eyes had returned. The vets said his vitals were a miracle. They didn't know about the Phoenix program. Ray wasn't sure they ever would, but some truths didn't need to be shouted. They just had to survive. The workers covered the casket and left. Ray knelt beside the grave, brushed the dirt with his fingers. "Thanks for not giving up," he murmured. "You made Max into more than a partner. You made him unstoppable." Max pawed at the grass, ears twitching. He pressed his nose to the soil, then began scratching. At first it seemed harmless, then furious. Ray's brow furrowed. "Max!" The dog growled, then barked. Clawed harder, Ray yanked him back and froze. Something metal clinked beneath the grass, not part of the coffin. Ray dug carefully with his hands, revealing a small lockbox, buried right above Caleb's casket. Inside, a sealed envelope, one line in Caleb's handwriting. "You thought it was over. It isn't." Ray's blood ran cold. Inside the envelope, coordinates and a photo, blurred, zoomed in, satellite image, a new facility, active, with dogs, with cages. Ray looked at Max. The dog was staring ahead, tail stiff, ears sharp, like he already knew. They hadn't stopped Phoenix. They'd only uncovered the first layer, and somewhere out there, something worse was waiting. 6 months later, at the sea, air smelled of pine needles and snow-damp earth as Ray stepped out of the cabin and watched Max bound through the frost-covered field, tongue out, legs stronger than they'd been in years. No limp, no hesitation. He ran like he had something to chase, even though he was finally free. Ray sipped his coffee, staring out at the clearing beyond the tree line. The new base sat beneath a false name, Wildridge K9 Rehab Center. A front, but also real. Dogs came here to heal, and humans too. Max had become more than just a K9. He was a symbol, the only survivor of Phoenix, a living contradiction to a project that had tried to erase compassion and replace it with programming, and it had failed. Because of one thing, Bond Max had chosen Ray, not because he was trained to, but because something deeper existed beneath the DNA splicing and biometric chains, something no lab could touch. Loyalty, love, the kind forged not in metal tanks or fluorescent laboratories, but in dirt, fire, and memory. Ray walked to the training ring, where a young woman struggled with a nervous German shepherd pup. The dog trembled at loud noises, wouldn't bark, wouldn't move without flinching. Ray called Max over. The old dog trotted up and sat quietly beside the pup, tail swishing gently. Within minutes, the pup inched closer, then sniffed, then curled. Beside him, the girl's eyes welled with tears. "He's not afraid anymore." Ray just nodded. Max didn't need medals, or handlers, or missions anymore. He was doing what no algorithm ever could, healing. That night, Ray sat alone in the office, reviewing the files. The coordinates Caleb had left led to a remote site in Russia, already burned to the ground. Someone had cleaned it before they arrived, but not before Max had caught the scent of someone, a figure on one of the monitors, face hidden, gait familiar. Ray froze the frame, the posture, the tilt of the head. He recognized it. It couldn't be, but it was. Lana, alive, or at least someone who looked like her. The betrayal at the cabin, the warning, her disappearance. None of it had been an accident. She'd been part of something deeper, maybe even running it. Ray leaned back, heart pounding slowly, steadily. Caleb had once said the program had layers, decoys, pawns, architects, and maybe Lana had played all three. Max stirred beside him, ears twitching. Ray glanced at the dog, then at the frozen frame of the woman he'd once trusted more than anyone. "I guess it's not over," he whispered. Max didn't flinch, he just stared at the screen, waiting, like he already knew. The next morning, Max stood at the gate, nose to the wind, waiting for Ray. Ray stepped out, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and clipped Max's vest around his chest. Not a police vest, not a military rig, just simple nylon with one word stitched over his heart. Family. They walked toward the SUV, not toward war, not toward vengeance, toward something harder, the truth, and whatever pieces of it were still buried out there in the snow. Inside the cabin, the camera feed kept rolling. The monitor flickered once. A new alert appeared in the corner of the screen. Subject Max 01 theme, still active. Handler connection unbroken. Phase 2, initiate. Then a login. Someone typing in real time. Username, Lana101. Password. Access granted, a final command appeared. Observe, do not interfere. He will lead us to them. Ray never saw the feed, but Max... The dog kept glancing over his shoulder that morning, as if he sensed something behind them. Not danger, not yet, just eyes, watching, waiting. And somewhere in the shadows, a war that never officially began was still quietly unfolding. Do you think Max's bond is the only thing keeping the truth from vanishing forever? Or is someone using him as a pawn in a bigger game?